So over to you, Martin.
Thanks very much indeed, Simon, and welcome and Happy New Year to everyone. And I look forward to sharing my experiences with you. And to join me is Stephanie, my soulmate. Stephanie joined me when I bought my boat in 2017, and we've been in close confines ever since. But the boat, she's a Sadler Starlight built in 1997, in very good condition. And a couple of things about her: she's got a 40 horsepower diesel engine, as you can see there, very small fuel tanks and not great water tanks. But she's a great cruiser with a large wing keel. And although I haven't invested yet in Starlink, I do have Iridium Go and an Iridium handheld on board for my satellite communications. And she's been a godsend and very comfortable cruising boat. Stephanie and I do not take passengers, and we sail short-handed wherever we go. The journey is shown here, or my journey of this year is shown here in red, and I'll go through it in gradual stages. But it started in Lewisport in Newfoundland and took us up the Labrador coast. Last year, we circumnavigated Newfoundland. It's an absolutely wonderful cruising place. But before I go any further, just a quick plug. Simon did his plug, but I would also like to reinforce that with the Cruising Club of America's Cruising Guide to Newfoundland and Andrew Wilkes's book. But also my thanks to Dick for his notes and everyone else who contributes pilotage information, because without that, the books wouldn't be as accurate or up to date as they can be. And certainly it makes cruising these waters a lot easier. And Dick actually gave me a very good contact of Ed O'Reilly. The link is there. He's got 4 videos, which are quite interesting to read should you want to. But enough of that. Going on to the cruise, Newfoundland has got a long history, and it's a geological wonder world. From its 580-year-old fossils, which you can walk on, one of the few places where you can walk on things so ancient, through to Matthew Cabot's boat and his alleged first arrival in 1497, which seemed to ignore the fact that the Vikings appeared in 1004 in Lancing Meadows, and even that ignores the fact that they were seen off 8 years later by the indigenous population. So the history goes back a long way. The latest diaspora of the Irish and the southwest English country folk, with their wonderful music and accents that now cover the whole of Newfoundland, make it a pleasure to cruise. We splashed in Lewisport at the end of May. We weren't in a rush to get away because pack ice this year had been particularly strong and extensive, and Notre Dame Bay was still blocked in by ice up until the end of May. And so despite a couple of delays waiting for spare parts, which one inevitably needs at the last minute, we were ready to go by the end of May. One of our first ports of call when we leave Lewisport is Knights Island, and we were lucky enough to have some friends who had sailed the day before, and we always have a mussel cookout. Mussels picked in the harbour on the shoreline and cooked over an open fire. And you might just be able to see an iceberg in the background. This was a change from any previous year, and it was to be a theme as we move slowly north. So this first part will cover the area in the circle, going up via Le Sea and up to the Great Northern Arm before going across Belle Isle Straits to Labrador. The whole of Newfoundland is dotted with beautiful anchorages. Many are old settlements, fishing settlements particularly. Most of them have been resettled for various reasons or political reasons, but a lot of the residents were able to buy their cottages back or rent them for $1 a year. And so you often find the settlements coming back to life in the spring and people using them throughout the summer. And this is Little Bay Island. It's quite a large community that was just coming back to life. And although it looks large, there are only 5 people living in there when we got there in the spring. But the whole of the coast is just dotted with them. This year, surprisingly, we saw icebergs from day one. And for me, this was a novelty. I just had never seen them before. And on one day, we counted 13 around us. For me, that was a real novelty and not scary so much, because Stephanie told me that, oh, that's easy. You just stay out of the way and keep upwind of them. But they came in all shapes and sizes. What was disconcerting were the bergy bits, and those who sail around them, you can see the icebergs and they show up on radar, but bergy bits from tiny little things of a meter across to 2 or 3 meters or 5 or 6 meters just don't show up on radar, weigh several tons, and will definitely ruin your day, even though they look very pretty and come in all colors and shapes and sizes. These little bits manage to find their way into all sorts of inlets, and they're not something you want to meet. In fact, we decided that we wouldn't normally night sail because of the risk of bumping into them. And about 10 days after we'd left Lewisport, we reached Lasky, just ready to jump off to the Northern Arm. A lovely foggy day, which was not untypical. And the bay was full of bergy bits. These in particular were trying to undermine the pontoon, and it's the first time we've had to walk uphill on a pontoon to get ashore. But they don't show up on radar. Elsewhere, cruising around the coast, you come across beautiful, isolated, and very safe anchorages. We often had to use landlines, and you can see us there with our shorelines coming out from the stern of the boat to keep us away from the rocky shores, because they're either very deep anchorages with relatively short, small shallows around the edges, or you have to tuck yourself into an outflowing stream. But they are typical. This is typical of the Newfoundland coastline with pine tree covered shoreline, deep ravines, lots of waterfalls. In fact, water was never a problem, and we were always, if we needed to, we're able to fill up at the water. After Lassie, we crossed to the Great Northern Arm. We found the weather this year was particularly strange in that the winds, the traditional prevailing winds, hadn't kicked in, and we had a lot of still days. So we ended up having to do more motoring than we wanted to. This was on the entrance to Souffle's Arm and Great Harbour Deep. There's a fishing camp just around the corner, and the salmon season was just opening up. That was covered at high water and not particularly well charted. But this is just typical of some of the surroundings, and little gems such as this one. I probably shouldn't tell you where this is because it's such a beautiful hurricane hole to be tucked away, that the wildlife surround the anchorage, and you can fish from the boat and walk up the hills. But just south of St Anthony's, that one, about across the bay. The harbours themselves, very often they're free, and if there is a charge, it's not very much. And one of the beauties of those, you can see the sandpiper tied up to the wharf with yellow railings on top, and that's reflects that it's a government wharf. Some of them will have power. In fact, that one did. Maybe even have water, but they're safe and secure. Fender boards are essential, but they are a welcome sight anywhere because they are usually always room to find a spot in amongst the fishing fleet, and if not, one can always raft up. The others, such as Engley, Triton, and Squid Cove, where they are available, they're good value. But if we were disappointed in St Anthony, because although it's a wonderful town, the the wharf there is horrible and doesn't have a yellow top and has horrible tires. And I know the better place to do is anchor off the museum and go ashore to their wharf. But in general, their harbours are lovely and safe and well sheltered. From Newfoundland, we were crossing the Belle Isle Straits, leading up the St. Lawrence River into southern Labrador, shown on here. We'd been up as far just north of Battle Harbour the previous year, and so this time we were going to go all the way to the top, right up to the Torngat Mountains. So this was very much new territory for us. And our first, well, it was actually the second night, because we stopped just short of here the previous night, was Battle Harbour, a great place for a stopover. It's quite expensive, but it's got a nice restaurant that you can use. And the important thing, it's got a nice lodge and lounge with Wi-Fi, and you can get a beer there. And a superb museum from the days when this was a major salt fishing or cod fishing centre. And to imagine them getting big schooners in to this tiny little harbour just shows what seamen they were in those days. We were the first boat of the season in there. The following day, 2 other aluminium boats came in. They were on their way to Greenland and then to do the Northwest Passage, which they subsequently did. And it was a joy for one of the boats to have a young family on, parents and a 6-year-old child called Dean, who was everyone's friend within minutes of meeting him. And he had been born on the boat and lived on the boat for the whole of his life. So I only hope he's going to keep that going and become a great sailor in the future. But Battle Harbour was our jumping off point for the north. And from there, we took an inner passage route, which was quite surprising, actually, how extensive it was. The whole of the coast has an archipelago running along the outside, and you're able to take what some people call the normal channel. It's often where the coastal steamer goes. But in places, it does get quite narrow, and you can see on the chart to the left, we went through a squeeze, which is not uncommon on the tickles, rigolets, and runs, as they call them. But you're at one with nature all the way. Plenty of anchorages just to drop in, even some, and many of them actually not even marked, but you can always find new ones. And they all come with evocative names, and such as Eagle Cove and Curlew Harbour, clearly named by someone for a very good reason. Other places, it's the geology that's amazing. This was Double Island because it splits into 2 big lumps, but between the 2 big lumps, which actually is a bit of a wind tunnel as well, there was this incredible boulder double beach which filled it. And for a geologist to have a geologist on board would be fantastic, but wherever you go, you're guaranteed interesting geology as well as beautiful anchorages. I mentioned the pilot early on, and this was one of the anchorages that just going around the corner, this is actually on the way out, but it says pass within 10 to 20 meters of the point, and no more and no less. And it's absolutely right. There's a channel going around the corner, and then it opens up to a beautiful anchorage, and we went around the corner and found this black bear muzzling on the side, who didn't take too much notice of us, but that was definitely a case to trust your pilot, and very accurate it was as well. In other places, you end up with a line of soundings with huge areas uncharted. They are taking steps to chart a lot of these waters, but this was one such place which we were having to motor across, going up towards Nain. There were no chartings and no soundings out 200 yards from where we were sailing, which makes it interesting because it could have been beautiful, but we did find some rocks that were certainly not marked on the charts, and so we tended not to be too adventurous in going into some of these beautiful, apparently looking waters. But given more time and perhaps with a forward-looking echo sounder, it would be a great place to creep in. But as we move north up the coast, the weather by and large was good. The wind was light in general. We managed to stay within the inner passage, and you can see it going through the mountains, but it was becoming more and more mountainous, and snow was beginning to appear on the sides of the mountains. One of the things that was disappointing in a way was the very poor VHF coverage as we moved up the coast. Newfoundland certainly has a pretty good coverage. Geology and deep fjords obviously create blind spots and dead spots, but the nice thing is that they have a continuous loop weather forecast, which is excellent. But as we move north, we lost that for much of the passage, and even when we tried to call up the Coast Guard, we couldn't get any response, although we kept on seeing high radar sites on the top of mountains, and they were indicative of the old dew line rather than anything else, and certainly not current radio relay sites, which is a pity, although we did have Iridium communications. No?
I'll just call you back so your camera comes back.
Interference. Hi, Veronica. Yeah. What we did see was a lot of the local boats had Starlink antennas on them, and that is absolutely amazing, and it's certainly something I'll be looking at. It's a very good cheap system, gives broadband as you go, so not that I want to go watching Netflix or Amazon Prime as I cruise up the coast, but it's a good system. The icebergs were big and they were beautiful. I'd just like a mention about drones. Stephanie's giggling because I had a drone in the Caribbean, and it's still there. So I bought another one, and I wanted to take one of the pictures, typical of Bob's pictures of the yacht silhouette or surrounded by an iceberg's window. So I said to Stephanie, let's stop, and I'll launch the drone and go to the other side and take a picture of Sandpiper through this archway. I forgot that the drone is geolocated to where it is on the earth and not where it is on the boat. So as I launched the drone, we were only doing about, well, I think about 1 knot. It might have been more, but it got 2 feet off the deck and went flying through the stern. Stephanie was at the helm, and it narrowly missed her, hit the backstay, and tumbled into the water. So I didn't get my picture, and I don't have a drone.
Oh no!
And I'm not getting another one. So great pity, because they do take great shots. One of the things I did as I went along was kept pilotage information of all our anchorages and harbours. I didn't write them up every day, so it was a memory jogger. I used to take a screenshot, and here are typical ones of Ladies Harbour and Amity Harbour, so that I would at least be able to relate to where they were. And of course, by taking a screenshot of the plotter, it gives the lat and long and various other bits, because I do feel that we all have a responsibility to give something back to those who spend so much time writing the pilots. But I would say that you have to navigate by eye a lot of the time. You can't trust the GPS. The land doesn't move. The rocks where they're shown normally don't move. But as shown on here, we were anchored on the top of a hill, apparently. So you do have to take it with a pinch of salt. And of course, bad weather and fog, which is so common in these areas, can really spoil your day if you don't actually pay attention to the land around you. As we move north, we came across some amazing little places. This was Square Harbour, deserted, apart. People were just moving back, literally, as we arrived there. This was a 20-meter deep hole all the way to the shore, with this rickety old wharf that was falling down. But I think the permanent resident was a ferret, sorry, a mink who stuck his head out between the railings as I was tying up, and we came eye to eye, and it certainly explained the smell, but I'm not sure who was more surprised, the mink or myself. But the beauty of these little places is that they're normally free from ice on the inside, even though on the outside you might be getting bergs and growlers running up against the shallows. Around every corner, there was always a surprise, whether it be wildlife or ice. And we were just in awe of both the landscape, which you can probably see has changed from Newfoundland and tree-covered hills to bare rolling hills with not so many trees anymore. The wildlife was not always easy to spot, but it was always there. And we did our best not to disturb them too much. We were aiming as one of our first markers up the coast for black tickle. Everyone had told us about black tickle and said, oh, you've got to go to black tickle. We weren't quite sure what to expect when we got there. And to be perfectly honest, we were disappointed. The fishing season hadn't started, so it was very quiet. This harbour looks idyllic. It's only 5 meters deep, but high water, so it gets a bit shallow. And we were actually quite glad to leave here, because elsewhere we had found such hospitality that we didn't actually come across here, but it was a turning point. And as you can see from this chart, black tickle marks the point where one's running out of southern Labrador and beginning to get into northern Labrador. And it's where we turned west to head for Cartwright. And if we'd kept going, we could have gone down to Goose Bay, but I wasn't really interested in doing the 150 miles down the lake to get there. But we did turn left and head to Cartwright, because once we'd reached Black Tickle, the ice was still hanging on to the whole of the northern coast. The weather had been varied all along the coast, and although many of the pictures have shown us having idyllic sunny days, they were interspersed with cool and foggy days when radar proved its worth, and we took our time cruising the waters through the fog slowly. But the reward was to find nice little havens tucked away where you could be totally on your own and think that no one had actually been there before, although no doubt they had. But they were beautiful, idyllic spots where perhaps if I wasn't in such a rush to get somewhere, I would have stayed longer. And I know Stephanie often wanted to stay longer, but I think she would say I was on a mission. Cartwright, we had to pause there because across the bay at Cape Harrison, the ice was still locked on the end of Cape Harrison. We couldn't go further north. It was a large ice sheet. I'm sure Bob would have gone, because he goes into Scoresby Sound when there's 9 tents sitting offshore, but I'm not quite that brave, Bob. But here it was an active fishing port. Boats were still coming in and offloading a variety of species, not yet cod, but we were able to tuck ourselves across from the fish plant and have 4 or 3.5 days there. Again, people were so generous either to take us on their buggies to pick up fuel, to go to the supermarket, or take us up to fill up jerry cans for water at the town's water supply. Or some people, we were walking, just exploring, and a young lady came up to us on a quad bike and offered us some muffins. She'd seen us and recognized us as foreigners, probably not too difficult, and rushed home to get some muffins. And that was a tradition they had, that if they saw anyone new, they'd give them fresh muffins. And Stephanie will talk about someone else who we met there, but wonderful hospitality, and I can't speak enough of them. This was the ice charts on the 7th of July, just after it had broken away. You can see the circle around Cape Harrison. That was 7 tenths. so still quite heavy, but there was a gap and it was moving in the right direction. That couldn't quite be said for the Greenland coast, which was still had this massive chunk of ice, pack ice, sitting off the coast, and that was to linger there for another month at least, shrinking gradually. But at any time it could have moved inshore. It actually moved offshore. But on the 7th of July, we felt we could actually move north, and the coastal traffic began again. Stephanie wanted to find a polar bear, and as we came out of Makovic, just north of Cartwright, we saw our first bear. I thought it was a bit of debris ahead of us, but as we got closer, we didn't get too close, but we started hearing this panting, and the bear was paddling like mad and working very hard to get out of our way. Hence, it's not a very good photograph. It's probably down to the photographer. But poor man or woman, I don't know. But where it was going to go to, I just don't know, because the ice was, by that stage, quite a long way off. And I don't know where its next meal was coming from. But people did assure us that they could swim, mainly 200 or 300 miles between the islands, and work their way north. But that was our first bear, so that was rather fun. And of course, the icebergs just got bigger and more beautiful. As we moved north, we managed to stay within the inner passage, often foggy, but often more a mist with visibility of a couple of 100 yards. So because the soundings, as you can see on the chart on the right, at least mark the central route and the narrows, it wasn't too bad to navigate through, and actually quite fun. You had to get the tides right, of course, because all of these come with their own quite strong tides currents at times. But as long as you paid a bit of attention to the flood and the ebb, you could get a nice kick as you went through them. As we moved along the northern Labrador coast, we stopped off and kept on seeing signs of the Moravian activity there. It started in the late 1700s and went right through to the 1900s. And they were a very active religious group who brought education to the Inuit and centralized the Inuit. What is left now is mainly museums, but signs of them all the way up, right to the northern reaches of the Labrador coast, up as far as Rama Bay. And we stopped in wherever we could see the results, or see the museums, and learn a bit more about what they had done to help educate the Inuit, which actually is a good story, unlike some of the stories that deal with child education. But this was a very good story, and they did a good job, so I'm told. This was Hebron, well up the northern Labrador coast, and we reached there in the back end of July. The large white building on the right is a restored, or being restored, Moravian mission building, beautifully and lovingly recreated by 3 caretakers and small teams who come up every year. They only come up for the summer, because this becomes icebound in winter. Sadly, not everyone's as dedicated as the workers who restored this. And last year they had $1,000 worth of tools stolen in midwinter from this building. So someone had obviously come up on a skidoo and sadly helped themselves to it. But a great place. And in fact, it was here that we came across our first polar bear guards, who met us when we dinghied ashore. And when we left, they gave us a 3-gun salute, or a 3-round salute, which was rather nice. And we met an American here, and she'd been brought in by speedboat for a couple of days, and she said, "Oh, I'm just going out to try and catch a fish." And I don't know, my fishing is bad. I don't know what it is about my fishing. I don't catch very much. But she came back 15 minutes later with a beautiful char she caught just off the beach, which was very annoying, to say the least. But the great fishing along the coast. More runs, tickles, and rigolets as we move north. We're looking forward to getting up to the high mountains on the Torngat National Park. And this was approaching Saglek, which is the entry point. The old pilots shows pictures of it as being a small encampment with just a few tents. It has blossomed and it's been handed over to the indigenous Inuit, and they've built it up tremendously. And now they welcome guests with open arms. Meals of we were lucky in that we were treated royally and had free meals, and even the fuel which you can buy there is no more expensive than in Cartwright, which is amazing considering they have to bring it in. But it's actually a great place if you need it to, as one of the last places to refuel, or one of the first places to refuel actually on that coast. But a lovely camp, very hospitable, taking people flying in their own helicopters or coming by speedboat from further south, and they're doing a great job helping people explore the Torngat Mountains. Sadly, when we were there, we got an updated weather forecast for 2 weeks of fog hugging the coast, which was bad enough for sailing, but it was even worse that we couldn't see the mountains properly. And this was as we cruised north up from Saglek, trying to get as far up as we could. We wanted to get to Cape Chidley, but we got into Rama Bay, which is the most northerly Moravian mission back in the 1902, but there were no remains there. But interestingly, this is also the place where Cherts rock is found, one of only 2 places in the world, the other one slightly further south in Labrador. And it was traded over 7,000 years ago and was found its way down to Maine. So people were going up and down this coast a long time ago. There's the chart for this inlet, a row of soundings down the middle. The 12.8 was off the old settlement, which we moved round to, but we just tucked ourselves in there. Amazing scenery. And although we didn't see any polar bears, when we went ashore, we saw their footprints. So we weren't carrying a weapon ashore on this occasion, but we didn't go very far. From there, moving north, signs of World War II activity. Seaplane Cove was used at the time. The picture on the left was what we saw, and it wasn't an awful lot. And in fact, it was here that we'd gone in the fog, and we saw breaking water to starboard as we cruised along before we turned in to the inlet. And we subsequently discovered the next day, when it was a bit clearer, that there's a whole row of rocks that were simply not on the charts. And if we'd been 300 yards further north, we might have had a different encounter, or we might have encountered it, which wouldn't have been very nice. So these waters need good navigation, pay attention to what's happening. From there, the next stop off, and which was to be our last stop on the Labrador coast, was in Eclipse Channel. We went in with this typical fog that had enveloped the coast by that stage, to be met by the MV Polar Prince. And those of you who recognize the name might remember she was the mothership for the disastrous last dive on the Titanic. She was now being used to take some indigenous children on a cruise, an educational cruise around northern Labrador. But we passed her and tucked in amongst various rocky outcrops, and the wind howled round Miller, or through Miller Peninsula, but we had good holding, and we managed to see a couple of bears and caribou on the coast. So that was rather nice, but we didn't linger because the fog was still around, and we decided that it was time to go to Greenland. And so we did, and we went just 40 nautical miles short of Cape Chidley. We set off the following morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was good daylight even then, coming up to the end of July. We were far enough north to get quite twilight throughout the dark hours or the late hours of the night. And Stephanie togged up. It was cold in the mist, and the forecast had said a nice northwest 4-5 for the first 24 hours, and then dropping off to a force 4 until we got to the other coast. It took us a little while to get through the shallows, and we were in fairly thick fog through the rocks and outlying islands off Eclipse Channel. It was a very tense first 18 hours, but thereafter I'd like to say that we saw lots of whales. We had glorious sunsets. The reality is that the wind dropped to just about force 3, but we ended up with the equivalent of sailing inside an upturned grey bowl with a grey steel flat sea surrounding us and nothing but grey to the horizon. But we did get one nice sunset, and we cruised very gently across to Greenland, taking longer than we expected, but we just relaxed and do what you do to get to Greenland. One of the things we were conscious of, because the pilots had pointed it out, that green POS reporting is very important. Mandatory reporting for all visiting ships, and to be reported, you have to report in on a predetermined form every 6 hours. So we dutifully did it. We waited until we were 150 miles offshore and then reported in. The only comment was, you should report in at midnight and every 6 hours. So we did thereafter. Greenland is a land of superlatives. That was our entry into Nuuk. We'd been in fog until we came into Nordlab, the fjord. Approaching it, broke out into bright sunshine for this stupendous, absolutely awesome fjord full of icebergs and surrounded by glaciers. And we're soon tucked up along Kittijack Wharf. There is actually no spare place on the wharf, and you have to raft up, but it's a great place for reprovisioning. The Egedy Hotel has a super restaurant, good seaman's mission, and a good place to just relax, and a nice safe harbour. One of the things we did notice, we as you probably recall, we've only got 170 litres, 75 litres of fuel on board, so we carried 200 litres on the deck. We never emptied the cans totally. In fact, once we got to Greenland, every settlement had fuel, often on small pontoons, not always ideal to come alongside. In fact, the one at the bottom is in Nuuk, and there's a very large rock about a foot under the water at the end of that pontoon, so you have to reverse out. But the great thing is that they're cash machines, card machines, so they're actually a 24-hour fuel service all along the coast, on the west coast, not the east coast, of course, which is totally different. From Nuuk, we wanted to go as far north as we could, and we were heading certainly for Sisimiut. And so it was on the 5th, we set out. We weren't going to use the inner passage because people said, don't do it unless you've got local knowledge. And so we thought discretion was the better part of valor. So although we stayed in the entrance to the inner passage and did find a very shallow spot as we went into this cove, we decided to go offshore. And very soon we were dropping in at old fishing stations, now dilapidated, but once showed signs of really thriving communities. And we were very conscious of well, I say high tides, they're only 3 to 5 meter tides. But when you've got deep water up to the edge, you do have to be careful where you drop the hook, and the state of tide when you drop it, because what was 3-5 meters when you dropped it, if you've got the tide wrong, could be quite shallow when you wake up. And this was not untypical. A calm day with a fog bank just lying offshore. And that was as we headed up towards Manitsokan. And occasionally it is nice to have a bit of civilization. And but at £14.50 a pint, we weren't drinking very much. But a great harbour, good facilities, and the backdrop was just to die for. The Coast Guard in Greenland is run by the Navy, Danish Navy, and this was one of their Coast Guard vessels that we kept on coming across as we cruised up the coast. Apparently they were training their officers, but they will be the ones to come out. And in fact, if you don't report on the green pos on time, they'll send you a reminder, and after that they'll launch a search and rescue mission, which unfortunately you have to pay for. This is a land of superlatives. The glaciers and the mountains just go on and on. And reading of accounts, whether it be Tillman's or the likes of Bob, or stories from our friend, now deceased sadly, Lady Denise Evans, who died very recently. You know, their stories of these places are just amazing when they were cruising these waters without the benefit of the electronic navigation we have. This was a fascinating place. We'd watched the coastal vessel come in through that gap, which is 7 meters deep and about 15 meters wide. We waited for it to go so we could tie up at the wharf. And this was a place where we learned the meaning of upstairs. You can see the overground pipes and these staircases running up the hill, which is just covered in these wooden staircases. And a lady said, "Oh, you can come to my house. I've got Wi-Fi. It's just upstairs." That was about 300 steps up the hill. So quite a different meaning. But here the ice cap comes down to the sea almost. The glaciers are receding. This was in Evingisfjord. How do you pronounce it? Evingisfjord. Denise Evans and in fact Bob had both said, "You've got to go there." And so we did, and it lived up to expectations. We didn't go to Tillman's anchorage there, but we did go to the glacier at the end. Surprisingly, not carving very much, but the glaciers are just receding, sadly. And you know, if you want global warming evidence, these moraines just speak out in volumes. But you know, mountains that I'm sure some are still unclimbed. But as we push north, about 150 miles north of Nuuk, we were ice-free in the water. And in fact, that determined when we came back from Sisimiut, which was our northernmost point. We wanted to go further, but having only got there on the 11th of August, we thought it prudent to turn around. We tied up against those two fishing boats at the end there. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, another fishing boat came in and tried to tie up against us. We were going to be the sandpiper sandwich. But we fortunately woke up and managed to cast off our lines and re-tie up on the outside, because that would have been uncomfortable doing that. Moving south from there, we went offshore to get south quite quickly. We came across some wonderful places. This was an old American Bluey World War Air Force base, Bluey West 4, I think it was. The flat gravel is actually the runway. There was no evidence at all, apart from some bulldozer tracks, that the Americans had been there. And we did walk around it extensively. And we arrived in sunlight. By the time we got back to the boat, that's all we could see. So weather changes quickly. We continued moving south down the inner channel. Lovely anchorages. Sometimes the pilot can be a little misleading. This said it was a lovely, safe anchorage, secure and safe. It was from ice, but the wind howled through it, and the holding wasn't particularly brilliant. But anyway, we survived a force 5 sitting there, so it can't have been that bad. One of the last major locations was Pamiat, great for refueling, and the wharf there is next to the fish factory, very active, but only just starting up again. And they opened up their facilities for us, just again, the signs of hospitality. Further south, we often had, well, we didn't often have it, but this was such a place where we had a choice between going up on the wharf and visiting the town, or going across the bay to an isolated harbour. You can probably see that the metal sidings of that wharf end quite abruptly, and that's often the case. And you don't want to be bounced against that in the rising and falling tide, because you could end up underneath the metal wharf. So we decided we go across to the shadow of the mountain. Quackertack, last major habitation we really visited. The highlight of that was something I'd never expected. It was visited by cruise ships, and you can see a tender running in there. And in fact, the frigate, the Danish frigate, was also alongside. So a busy harbour, a thriving community. But it had a fur shop. And there's a picture. Stephanie couldn't resist it. And she's got this gorgeous hat, which actually is very good for skiing. They tanned their own hides, and both reindeer and sealskin, and had a must-visit place. And we couldn't go past Unatok without stopping off. Simon thinks the icebergs haven't moved since he was there, and they're probably right. That was when we got there, and we almost had it to ourselves, but you can just see in the background on the right some campers coming up to have a swim as well. The following morning, we couldn't see any icebergs, but we had to feel our way out around there. But I need to move on because Stephanie's got a little bit to say. And that was entering into Prince Christiansund at the end of August. That had been our target. And it was just magnificent. We'd asked some friends, in fact, it was Chris and Fiona Jones who recommended this was a good place to sit out a blow. And we knew there was a Force 9 coming in. And so we tied up to the harbour there. The coastal vessel couldn't get in. So we had it to ourselves, and we had about 9 lines ashore, which kept us nice and safe, including our 2 reels. I just throw this in because those 2 circle things are 100-meter Dyneema reels on stainless steel reels, which we use quite often. Absolutely brilliant. But enough from me, and I'll hand over to, if I can find Stephanie's slides. I can't find Stephanie's slides. This is going to be annoying. Oh no, that's all right. I got it wrong. From Apelituk, we headed through Prince Christiansund, heading towards the weather station. This is a 25-mile long fjord, almost dead straight, with glaciers coming down on both sides. Not really carving very large bits, but that was the weather station. And I thought we could go nose in there, but we couldn't, because I went nosing around this iceberg, only to have to come out and have to reverse in, which was slightly worrying. And in the morning, it hadn't moved too much, but we did go out the other way around. And that was our view back of the ice cap. As we said, farewell to Greenland, or so we thought. Because as you can see from the circle, there was a slight dog leg, and the Denmark states are notoriously unpredictable. And we got 2 days out from Prince Christiansund and picked up the weather forecast of a Force 9 sweeping up from the south along the Iceland coast and lasting for 48 hours. So we decided to turn around and head back towards the coast, making as best north as we could in the prevailing winds, and head for Timiamuit. I haven't pronounced that right, but it was Tillman had an anchorage here, and we thought, well, it was good enough for him, it's good enough for us. But there were a lot of icebergs around, and that was in the channel going up to the anchorage. And we didn't feel that this was a spot to get trapped for rather a long time. So we went around to the alternate anchorage. You can see the ice cap in the back. Now, we didn't know what a willy wall really was until 1 o'clock in the morning, when we were woken up with a gale through the rigging and the unnerving sound of the anchor dragging. I don't think Stephanie and I have got dressed and all the systems up and running as quickly as before, but we were on the 3rd go, the engine started, and at 1 o'clock we were able to creep out of the inlet into a dead calm of the iceberg filled fjord. To say it was a little unnerving was understatement, but we decided we'd creep out through the ice and head north to Tasiilaq and decide where we were going after that. And so we did, and we crept out, and a couple of days later, we're 90 miles south of Tasiilaq and had an amazing nighttime encounter with whales. When Stephanie was on watch, she called down to wake me up, and we were becalmed effectively. But we were surrounded by a large pod of, we think they were humpback whales. It was hard to tell, but they were just rising and falling all around the stern of the boat for about 20 minutes, not really moving, but singing or calling. And we don't know whether they thought we were a beleaguered whale or what, but eventually they moved off and we moved on. But that was just amazing. And we were greeted by more whales as we entered Tassilac. Just wonderful to move in there. But it was a nice, safe anchorage. But we realized that when the harbour was frozen the following morning, that it probably was time to be moving on. And so we did. But I must now hand over. I've overrunning my time, Simon, but I've finished more or less, and I'll hand over to Stephanie for what she promises is a quick bit. Over to you, Stephanie.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie, and here are my reflections of our passage last year. I'm going to do it through using the 3 Ps. I'm going to look at my own personal polar bear quest and the places that we put in, and also have a look at some of the people that we met. I'll keep it short, so we're over time, and got to find out where to move these slides from. Previously, I had been to Greenland and Arctic waters on 4 occasions. 2 of them were kayaking expeditions up the east coast. They certainly make you feel small in a kayak with these big icebergs. And then after the 2 sea kayak expeditions I went on, I was fortunate enough to crew on Dodo's Delight with Bob Shepton. You can always rely, this was in 2013, on Bob's west to east transit. You can rely on Bob, Reverend Bob, to take you to interesting places. And my own interests in this trip were to compare how things were on my previous visits to how they were today. And that's apart from my prime interest in polar bears, because in all the 4,000 to 5,000 nautical miles I'd paddled and sailed in Arctic waters, I hadn't seen a single polar bear, except this one on a hotel floor, that one on an airport wall, that one outside somebody's house, draped over a bench, and on the washing line. That's probably the nearest I'd got to one, seeing a footprint. And there is Martin and our bear guard accompanying us to the shore to go on our boat. He's carrying his rifle. We weren't allowed to go unaccompanied. No doubt the bear guard was very keen not to see a polar bear. I was willing and wishing to see a polar bear. And there's Martin, togged out in his very best bug jacket, determined not to get bitten by the mozzies. I can't turn it. Anybody going up there might be interested in getting one of these bug shirts. All the local people are wearing them now, it seems. So, in the brief 5 minutes that my skipper has allocated to me, I will zoom through the beginning of our trip. We started here at Lewisport in Newfoundland, otherwise called the Rock by anybody who lives there. It's reputedly the land that God gave to Cain because of its ruggedness. Sadly, we left here to take our trip. I say sadly because this beautiful specimen of a bike here is my bike, Lady Diana. You perhaps see her name written on the crossbar, Diana, and also written on her elsewhere. It says that she's the pocket rocket, and I carried her on the Sandpiper from the Canaries all the way to Newfoundland, and I loved her. Martin hated her. He said she was rusty, she was cumbersome, and she took up too much space, so we ended up leaving her at Lewisport Marina for other sailors to use to get to the shops, etc. Lewisport is a town with a population of about 4,000 people. And normally anywhere we go, I like to have a swim wherever it happens to be. But there was no way I was going to swim at Lewisport because they have no sewage treatment systems at all. It isn't the sort of place you'd go harvesting mussels either. You had to have to go quite a bit offshore before you'd start looking for mussels to eat them safely. So I would say that not every settlement and every outport was picture perfect like this one. There's a lot, although we were delighted actually to see these Welsh poppies growing at Nain, because at the time our home was in Wales, in Snowdonia. So that was a bonny sight to see those Welsh poppies growing out of nothing. But there's actually a lot of dilapidation, some more so than other places. When the buildings were all wood, it didn't really matter if they dilapidated and fell into the water. But now there's a lot of other rubbish and trash and garbage. When one skidoo dies, they just go and buy another one and leave the old one rotting. And if you imagine it, if you've never had a garbage collection ever in the lives of people, this is what it looks like. I'm sorry it's not a good photograph, but all this area here, that's rubbish, garbage that they take about 100 yards away from the town, just out of sight on the right. And that is what happens to the rubbish. That's a photograph of a dead doll in a puddle. There's the problem is they've got no soil there, so they can't bury the rubbish. And they can't even bury the dead very well. They're very shallow graves, and neither have they got soil to grow flowers. These are all plastic flowers, and all the gravestones are covered in plastic flowers. It isn't just the locals that litter the place. This is another Bluey East World War II US airbase, and they upped and left that in 1947 in exactly that state. On our approach when we were kayaking, on the kayaking expedition, it looked like there were poppy fields in the distance on the hillside. As we got closer, we realized it was all these dead barrels of fuel that were left full in 1947. Complete vehicles. Their officers were left with books in as well. Just devastation, really. The best maintained properties, buildings, were the churches. Beautiful ones like this. In this village of Apamiat, Apilatock, we were stormbound there for 4 days. And Bob, you might be quite interested to hear that on the Sunday, we went to the church service there. As we walked in, we were handed the hymn books. And if you'll notice on the wall there, there's the hymns in order and hymn numbers. And we were merrily singing along to the hymns with great gusto, especially Martin. And after about 3 verses, the congregation stopped singing and we were ready to carry on. It seems that we had been singing from the wrong hymn. And I'll tell you the reason why we were, because look at the words that we were singing. But it was fun, and we think nobody noticed. So, so we finished now with the places we went to. I just want to talk about the people. They're just the most friendliest, happiest, most generous folk you're ever likely to meet. This is Mike from Cartwright, and he gifted us two snow partridge in feather, just taken out of his freezer, which we had to pluck and dress and eat, and they were delicious. Here's Julie, she's a skidoo fanatic, and that's her skidoo. And just look at that tool shed. The people in Labrador and Newfoundland have tool sheds to die for. They've got every bit of tackle you could imagine. And this lady, Julie, gifted us a big box of prawns. And this is the label she has on the front of her skidoo. Kids who hunt, trap and fish Don't mug little old ladies. This is another couple that we met. Oh, will they be able to see that? Yes. These couple made a visit to us in their jet ski. We were about 50 miles from any settlement, and we saw this plume of water coming towards us. And it was this young couple approaching us. And as they came alongside, they started winging cans of beer over to us, which landed on the deck and exploded until we did manage to get some that didn't explode. And I don't know if you notice up here, this is the Welsh national flag, Burgee. And because of people's generosity, we took a whole pile of these with us and we gifted them to people. And it was only a couple of days later when we arrived in Nain, we were going along the high street and there they were. They'd put our Burgee on the top of the aerial of their vehicle. So it's quite a nice touch. Greenland, the people again, just so full of smiles and happiness and welcoming. They welcome you into the home. Very modern, trendy young girls there with the young kiddies, but still with the traditional amity capes that they keep the children, wrap the children in. All the times I've ever been up in those parts, I have never heard a child have a tantrum or cry. I think they must be very good at parenting. Look, interesting people. This lady had just arrived at the supermarket on her quad bike, blocking the steps for anybody else who wanted to get up. And when she found out that I was from the UK, she said, "Oh, Coronation Street." Little children playing about, lovely, happy, smiling faces, and the Greenland shops. It's probably the only place you can find rifles and ammunition in boxes next to Tupperware jugs and babies' nappies. And this armory is bought with intent. It's not really a good place for vegetarians, perhaps. These ladies are getting stuck into a seal. Every bit of them is used. That was the photograph we took this year as we were leaving Manitouk. They just killed that whale, which was rather sad to see it draped over the stern of the vessel. And this man was just dressing a seal he'd shot. And to his left here, this was a porpoise. They actually hunt and eat porpoise there too. Going back to the garbage situation, I think probably I'll summarize now. It's time to wrap up. That's a tug that is making an annual visit to collect garbage from one of the ports. And I think the next slide will show Sisimiut, a typical working town on the west coast. It's a fishing port and with a small harbour, and actually has lift-out facilities if you need them. Denmark and Canada have granted more self-governance now to the First Nations, and we saw this evidenced in the Coast Guard communications we had, now manned by First Nations people. It did lead to a few language difficulties actually, but it's good to see that they're managing their own affairs and they're dealing with all the problems of drug and substance abuse, domestic violence, alcoholism, trying to reduce the suicide rate, improving dental health, and generally beginning to gain more awareness of the environment and beginning to collect the rubbish, taking more of a pride in the environment and aligning their lives more towards tourism as their futures. Cruisers, I guess, in the next 10 years will find many more changes than I did. I'll end now by saying, may I wish you always have wind in your sails and long may your jib sheet draw, as they say in Newfoundland. I'll hand over to Martin again.
Thanks, Stephanie, because I know we've overrun. Enough to say that we did a 3-day crossing to take advantage of the prevailing winds from Tasiilaq to Reykjavik. We felt we couldn't go around the north to Isafjorda and back home. We had a dodgy engine. The winds were blowing hard from the north and storms were coming in from the south. So we had a wonderful crossing. northern lights every night from wall to wall, which was a great way to end our cruise. And Sandpiper is back on the hard once more, and we shall go and revisit her and start the next leg of our journey. So thank you very much for staying with us, and I hope you've seen something to entice you to those waters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin and Stephanie. That was super. And I wasn't expecting Stephanie to come in, so that was a great bonus. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for those insights over time. I'm going to ask people to put their electronic hands up and come in with questions. If you're on as a panelist, you just need to unmute your microphone. But if people could put their electronic hands up, that would be good. Whilst we're waiting for them to do that, Martin, Stephanie, you've had 100 people online for most of the evening, which is great. Well done. Your Dyneema lines, they look quite expensive. They actually look fantastic, but do they float?
Yes, they do. They're floating lines, obviously very strong being Dyneema, easy to roll out, and then you just wind them back in, and they've got a self-tailing mechanism so that you can wind 100 yards in a minute. It's brilliant. And they do float. So that has its pluses and minuses.
A great alternative to Polypro, which is just so bulky in the lengths that you need. Wow. Yeah. I won't ask how much they were, that would embarrass you, but interesting your tales about black tickle. I've got a bone to pick with black tickle because my brand new iPhone slipped out of my pocket in the dinghy and lies in the murk of black tickle somewhere. So I hate the place as well.
Yeah. Good.
But you're right. I remember black tickle was probably one of the most squalid places that we visited in Labrador, with a tiny population who had kind of just felt completely disenfranchised, really, and surrounded by squalor, depressing, and huge contrast to the west coast of Greenland, where the transport links are so much stronger because of the Danish influence, whereas it's pretty difficult to ship stuff up and down that Labrador coast. We've got some hands up. Can't see whose. Sal, can you see who's got their hand up? I see we've got some Newfoundlanders online, including Wilson Fitt, who wrote the guidebook. So he might want to. Why can't I see who's got their hand up? I think they have to put their hand down. That's why. It would be great if Wilson or Ted Laurentius wanted to come in. Ted, I'm going to open up your microphone because you are our very own Newfoundlander there. So Ted, if you've got a microphone, you can unmute it and come in if you want. Oh, Wilson's beaten you to it. So I just want to put a shout out before Wilson comes in for Martin's pilotage notes. They are stunning. And if you look at the OCC cruising information map, the whole of Newfoundland, Labrador, west coast of Greenland is alive with his posts. They're meticulous, they're detailed, and dare I say it, almost as good as Wilson's book. Wilson, do you want to come?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I need to correct you. I am the editor of the CCA Guide to Nova Scotia, but Newfoundland is done, the last edition just released this year is done by Doug Bruce, who may be online here.
He was earlier.
Yeah, so you're giving me credit where it's not deserved. But the Newfoundland Guide, just as a little local color, we always say Newfoundland with the accent of land at the end. And there's all kinds of ways to say that. But Doug did the last round of the Newfoundland Guide, and it was just released this spring, and it is very, very good, very detailed. And we're just now engaged in doing an update of the Labrador Guide, so that CCA also does one for Labrador. It hasn't been updated for a few years, and I'm hoping that we'll get an update out this year, and we'll be trolling for input very shortly here.
Well, there's a huge amount on the OCC site, as I'm sure you're aware, Wilson.
Yes.
I see we've got some other notable guidebook editors on too. Myri, is that you, Myri, or is this Andrew Wilkes? Do you want to come in?
Hi, Simon. It's Maura and Andrew. So I just want to say what a fantastic talk, really inspiring, and I can't wait to get back there. We've got a couple of questions. One is picking up on your point about the Damina lines, and Damina doesn't stretch. So you know, would a bit of stretch or give in those lines be useful? And the other thing I was going to ask was, you were going against the currents on the east coast of Labrador. You were going north, and what was the current like? Was it significant? Over?
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for your book. It was brilliant. The Dynamo didn't cause me any problems with not stretching, and we tended to, because they were going out laterally, you could move slightly backwards and forwards on them, so that gave it the spring, as opposed to trying to tie yourself very rigidly, which would probably have ripped the cleats out, I suspect. So I was quite happy not to have stretch, because it held the boat in a triangular formation, which was the way I tended to use them. I'm floating can be a problem with ice, I know, but we were happy with them. And as for current, we never found it a problem, even going through the inner passages, as long as you got the tides right and went either, you know, with the flood or the ebb, it was okay. And I suppose because we went quite well offshore to get up to Tasselak, we weren't affected by the coastal currents very much. And to be perfectly honest, we had to aim off a little bit, but not much. Certainly not noticeable over the long legs that we were doing once we were offshore.
Martin, that's brilliant. Thank you. And Maura's just scribbled a note to me which says, "Did you meet the Canadian Mounted Police?"
Yes.
Particularly in Cartwright, because when we were there, they very kindly they met every boat that came alongside, and drove us to the pub, mainly because they were worried that we fight, because every other boat was a fishing boat. And so they drove us to the pub and drove us back again. And we wondered if you had that experience, Evan.
Well,
We had the whole family on board.
yeah, we had the whole family on board there, and we've got a plaque from the Canadian Mounties, which they gave us, and so that's on the wall of Sandpiper. They didn't drive us to the pub, unfortunately, but they did offer to give us a tour of the town. They were just great. They really were. We had problems on the previous year with the CBSA, the immigration authorities, when we came back in from Saint Pierre to Fortune, I think. And well, in fact, it's always been a female CBSA agent who has given us aggro. And I don't think we ever deserved it, but they certainly made us feel unwelcome. But the Mounties were wonderful.
Martin, thank you very much. We really enjoyed the talk. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I opened up Doug Bruce's microphone because obviously I wrongly attributed his masterpiece to Wilson Fitz. So, Doug, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, thank you, Simon, and congratulations, Martin, on a beautiful presentation. And thank you for so many of your generous notes, which found their way into our book.
Thank you.
All I can say is Newfoundland is just the greatest cruising grounds that we've experienced in our short lives, and can't recommend it highly enough. And we're always available for questions and consultation if anybody has interest in going there.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
Thank you, Simon, and Happy New Year to everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too as well, Doug. For those that don't know, Doug's up in Maine. I've actually asked Adam Kerner to open his microphone because I know Adam was cruising up in the south coast of Newfoundland. We were debating how to pronounce it before, Wilson, but I know Adam was up there. So Adam, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, hi, Simon, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, we had a wonderful trip this last summer. Cindy and I took Bravo from Maine up to Nova Scotia along the south coast, and then up to the west coast of Newfoundland, and then across up. We only got as far as Cartwright. We had to meet some friends down on the south coast of Newfoundland, so we had to turn around. We were right behind Martin and Stephanie from those dates that they were in Battle Harbor. I think we were a week behind you guys.
Oh.
And then we just got as far as Cartwright, like I say, turned around, but just fantastic cruising. There was a lot of ice, and as Sandpiper found, the bergy bits were a worry in the fog. The big guys were easy on radar, but just outstanding cruising, private anchorages. We'd go days and days without seeing another boat, and the people that we did meet were friendly to a fault. I mean, they would throw us their car keys and say, go fill up your jugs if you need them, and do whatever you need to do. The truck is ready for you. And when I raised my eyebrows, he said, well, we know where your boat is, and it's worth a lot more than our truck. So,
Yeah,
that was pretty typical.
yeah.
That sounds like the same guy that lent us their car. They said, we know where your boat is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a wonderful place to cruise. It just we would love to get to Greenland. Those shots that you guys showed, Martin and Stephanie, really stirred us, and we would love to do that one day. So yeah, great presentation, and we thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, good luck on the cruising. And we only saw, once we left Battle Harbor, we didn't see any boats until we got to Nuuk. So sailboats. So yeah,
Yeah, you
beautiful
do have
cruise.
it to yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's a point I'd like to make, really, because in terms of remoteness, that northern coast of Labrador is about as remote as it comes, really, isn't it? Or maybe not the Northwest Passage, but cruising down in the Antarctic Peninsula, you'll see shed loads, you'll see cruise liners. But up,
Right.
So we didn't get further than Makovic, but you really don't see anybody else.
Simon, that's a good point, and I was meaning to mention that as well. Is we had certainly done our homework about spare parts and how remote it was, but I think until you get there, it's hard to appreciate just how much you are on your own, and there is nobody that will be able to help with any, no tradies that can really give you a hand. They say all the fish boats go to Newfoundland, to the East Coast for serious repair work. So you do need to be very well prepared.
And I can absolutely guarantee that you can't buy a replacement iPhone in Black Tickle. It's pretty useless anyway, because there is no cell phone signal there. It wasn't 5 years ago. Things have changed. Bob, do you want to come in, because you've cruised these parts more than many, and it'll be good to hear from you.
Well, no, I don't know much about Labrador. No, that was very good. I would like to point out to the people talk about these bergy bits, and the correct term is growlers, in fact, with table-sized blocks, which I agree are the ones that are difficult to see. The icebergs are easy, but growlers, especially at night, is a bit of a problem, really. But well, thanks very much for the talk. It was nice to see some of those places again. I thought you were a bit cautious here and there, mind you, but but all the same. And it was good that you went into Evans Fjord, because that was a fantastic place, really.
Yeah. And Bob, I have to tell you that where you have written the hills were covered in reindeer, they're not anymore.
Oh, right.
That's one of those telescopic sites.
Yeah.
Great. Well, if nobody else wants to put up their hands in the next moment or two, somebody has. Angie, Angie, do you want to come in? You've got your hand up. You can open your microphone if you wish.
Hi there, Simon. Can you hear us?
We can, yes. Yes, go ahead.
Hi there, it's Alex and Angie.
Okay, yeah.
Andy, thank you, Martin and Stephanie. Thanks so much for the talk. Very, very fascinating to learn more about that part of the world. We were actually in Greenland this year, just in the very southwest corner of Greenland for about 6 weeks. But the whole area of the Canadian part, we've never been to. We think probably you maybe even crossed paths with the boat Atlas that we were on. I'm not sure if you met them somewhere along the way, but I think you were there at around the same time. And yeah, it was a great reminder of the fantastic experience we had there, sailing, ice, the people we met there. It was really exactly like you said, a fantastic experience. And even though we stayed for quite a long period in a very small part of the big country of Greenland in the southwest, we also every day found new surprises around every corner. So it's amazing how much there is to discover there.
Thanks, Angie. It is. It's amazing. You could, as you did, spend a season in one small area. It's fantastic sailing.
Angie, did you get into the Danish weather station at the end of Prince Christiansen?
So the boat we were on, Atlas, we sailed to Greenland from France, and we stayed with the boats in southwest Greenland until the beginning of August, when we had to fly back to actually go to our own boat. But the boat did continue through Prince Christiansand and head on to Iceland as well, but we weren't on the boat at that point. So yeah.
The answer to your question, Stephanie, we managed to get into the weather station when we were there because there was a work party flying drones, actually mapping the whole area. They should have had you, Martin.
Yes.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not.
It would have been a very quick mapping episode, but
yeah.
So we were lucky enough to get in there. So that was certainly a highlight of one of the highlights of our trips through Prince Christiansand. Bob, you had your hand up briefly.
No, I was actually going to ask about the weather station because when we were there, it was all open and you climbed up all the steps there and you got into the weather station. And I remember the startling thing was the excellency of the Danish pastries that they gave.
Yeah.
It isn't
nice, safe little jetty there. And you could stay there for as long as you liked and everything. They were they were very friendly and helpful.
I think it's now being used as a helicopter emergency refueling spot because there were certainly a lot of drums of avgas on the wharf, but the place was closed and deserted.
It's not manned anymore.
No, I gathered that. Yeah.
Great. Well, it's I don't know what time it is. It's 9:30. So you guys have been talking for an hour and a half. Thank you very, very much for dialing in. Thanks to everybody that has also dialed in. Next week, what are we talking about next week? So next week, it's gone completely out of my head. Can't remember. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Next week we are talking about the digital property of the Ocean Cruising Club, our amazing website, our amazing database, all that cruising information, all that fleet map information, all that mapping where everybody lives anywhere in the world. So if you want to unravel the mysteries of that and how it all works on your mobile phone or your iPad, I can see Bob's eyes glazing over as I speak. then dial in. But if you don't dial in, Bob, there's no excuse because it's all going to be recorded. It's all going to be put up on the website. So
I'm actually going sailing. You'll be
so you can watch it at leisure from your from the navigation station on board Novara, courtesy of Elon Musk Starlink. There is no excuse. So anybody who says I don't understand the website, it's all going to be presented to you next week. It's all going to be recorded for posterity. Thanks, Martin and Stephanie. Enjoy the rest of your 2-month ski trip. Enjoy your new house on southeastern Skye, and do get Martin out paddling in that kayak. And we'll see you later in the summer.
Take care. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
New Year greetings, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Dick. Bye.